So thank you very much indeed, everybody, for coming to Kelso Racecourse this evening. I'm very interested in learning more about net zero this evening. Here at the racecourse, we have a project that we're looking at over the next few years to build several new buildings, but first of all, a new weighing room complex here at the racecourse with a hospitality facility above it. And we estimate that that building is probably going to cost about £4 million. It's a sizable construction project, and obviously we'll be looking for as much assistance as we can in the building of that from racing organisations and so on, and also from enterprise agencies. And we know that one of the factors in finding the finance for that and indeed making the business stack up afterwards is that we're able to comply with various sustainability targets. And so obviously, that's particularly relevant to this evening. So just to put the net zero issue into some context, we've just got a couple of slides before I introduce our speakers. So the target is to be net zero by 2045. There are 58,000 homes in the borders and 6,000 businesses, which were obviously expelling quite a significant amount of CO2. And so by 2045, all the EPC documentation for all of those properties will need to be a minimum of C. So there's a lot of investment required to achieve that. It's estimated to be about 1.5 billion over 25 years, which means that the construction industry in this region is going to have to increase its output by at least 50% on top of what we currently do. So that's more business for more people with the right skills. And that is one of the key topics for this evening. On your chairs, you've got some information about the Scottish Borders Construction Forum. And there'll be people here that can talk to you a little bit more about that and how it applies to you. And indeed, we've got other contacts. If you want to speak to anyone at Visit Kelso about net zero, I suspect you might approach me or Emily, or we've actually got Tina, who's the chair of Visit Kelso, in the room this evening. We're happy to talk to anyone about businesses in Kelso and how we can work together and how we can help each other. I'm going to introduce you first to Richard Moncur, who is the Regional Business Manager for Valiant Heat Pumps. And we asked Richard if he would come and speak to us, particularly because when we were asking people about the first net zero event that we staged, a lot of the people that worked in the trades said, we're just busy doing what we're doing. We're fitting gas boilers and, that's what we do. And all these heat pumps and stuff, it's all futuristic. And we sensed that actually the people that perhaps they listen to most are those that are supplying the equipment. And so we thought it'd be a good idea to have Richard come and tell us about what Valiant are doing in terms of pushing the horizons on these new products and how they might work in the future and help us towards the net zero target. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to Richard.
Thank you very much. Hello everybody. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to come along this evening. Thought I would kind of kick off with give you an overview about what Valiant's approach, and you may be familiar with Valiant being more familiar in the gas boiler sector. And it was thought it'd be good to give you an approach and a view about how we're looking forward to the future and what our plans are. So Valiant at a glance, we currently as a company have over 30 million customers that we currently deal with, and we're based and supply in over 60 countries. With an installer network currently under just over 340,000 installer partners, and basically working to supply that global network of heating sector product, i.e. gas boilers. As you can see, we are far reached in the actual European market. As a company, we are very much interested in developing our strategy, working through to the renewable technologies going forward. And we have a separate division that works with our traditional teams to work out, obviously, how we transition these installer partners into that renewable sector. So, when you think about what this means in reality in today's world, 1 in every 3 boilers that are sold in the UK are effectively Availlant. The company's been trading since 1874, and it's still a family-owned business, believe it or not. We, as a company, have been dedicated to be sole manufacturers of the product that we basically want to promote within the actual heating sector and develop the product in-house. We're not a company that tends to bring the product in from different regions of the countries or in the world. Very much manufactured in the UK, down in Derby, and we fundamentally are supplying, as I say, 1 in every 3 boilers in the UK are supplied to be Availlant. Now, ultimately, when you start thinking about what the challenges are facing us, we've had to support heavily into our training capabilities. We have 7 training centres that are spread about the UK that basically offer in-house training to do with gas boilers, to cover renewables, to do with air source, to do with ground source. And it's all about taking that traditional gas installer through that journey of how they understand renewable technologies and how they get involved in that. And it probably starts more about understanding what decarbonisation actually means and what that means for the future. We'll cover a wee bit of that later on as we go forward. So one of the commitments that our company have made, that effectively what we're sending out to the heating network, is that we effectively want to be as strong as we are in heat pumps as we are in gas boilers today. Now that's a big statement coming from a company that's fundamentally been built up on gas boilers. The question is, how do we go about doing this? So there is some big challenges, and there's some key sort of numbers up here that I thought would be worth maybe pointing out. So if we look at what we currently do in the market, there's 1.5 million boilers that are effectively installed in the UK every year. That's a huge amount of numbers that are actually replaced, and that's just general replacement of traditional, obviously, retrofit installations. Out of that, you're looking at 1.2 million boilers are basically what we class as stress purchases. Something's broken down, it needs to be repaired straight away, and the rest of it is due down to planned experience. And that's generally administered by the gas safe registers installers of 135,000 of them. And as you think about where we are in today, what we're talking about with some of the carbon challenges and the actual targets we've set ourselves, that basically equates to around about 5,500 gas boilers installed every single day in the UK. And that's a huge number if you think about what that actually means. So how do we get to the numbers that we're indicating to do with heat pumps? As we sit today in the market, there's currently around about 20,000 heat pumps installed in the UK, generally at this present moment. I think this year will probably top round about the 35 to 40,000. But that's basically administered by a list of what we call MCS registered installers, and these are qualified installers who are actually trained and understand the technology and how to install them. Now, from a UK perspective, there's only 830 of them registered in the UK to actually allow to do that effectively under the government schemes. Believe it or not, under that 830 registered heat pump installers throughout the UK, there is currently only 98 heat pump installers registered in Scotland to actually fulfil that demand. And that's the biggest challenge that we're actually facing at the present moment. There's not enough skill set there within that sector to fulfil what we need to do. So as I put a number up here to give you a bit of a scale of a context there, and that really equates to around about 90 heat pumps done per day. So if you think about what we're actually asking us to achieve and what we're aiming to do, is that the ambition is we need to put 10 million heat pumps into the market and to be operating by the time we get to 2035. That basically equates to, we need to shift that goalpost to around about 3,600 heat pumps per day for that period of time, and that's just not a small step, that's a huge step. And as part of the industry, we're responsible to try and help that journey. We need to understand how we're going to get that traditional installer base to kind of come forward and actually embrace the new technologies that we're talking about here today. We're in the best place to deliver that message because we deal with these gas installers day in and day out, and we've developed our own training centres and our own trainers that are capable of bringing and upskilling that network. So, as I've mentioned some of the actual key numbers, and it's worth pointing these out as well. Scotland, outside that, have set a very ambitious target to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions in Scotland to reach net zero by 2045, 75% reduction by 2030 and a 90% reduction by 2040. Massive numbers, but ultimately we can achieve it with a strong focus on how we actually focus on the actual 4 pillars, which I'm about to show you next. 24.1 million homes are connected to the gas grid in the UK. And we've only basically 4.3 million basically been off-grid. That's basically our biggest challenge we have at the present moment. The homes that we are sitting with today are going to be here by the time we get to that target of 2045. So how do we effectively move 24 million homes to be net zero carbon? And that's the biggest challenge that we're facing. So, the 4 pillars that we identify as the achievement to net zero are basically, as we identify here, buildings, stock fabrication improvements. It's fabric first, insulating the buildings is a key aspect of what we try to achieve, to generate the energy, to keep the energy in the building as long as we possibly can. Delivering a sound understanding of heating system improvements, what can be done. I tend to call it as MOTing your property. Understanding what basic measures we can actually do to improve the running performances of our home when it comes down to installation levels, down to upgrading the TRVs, all these certain different measures we can actually look to energy management systems within that property. One of the other key aspects we've been looking at is certainly to do with installer training and upskilling and development, and certainly it's one of the key topics that we need to drive forward, because ultimately the technology is here today to achieve these numbers, but the installer network is not there to help us support that. And lastly, one of the other pillars that we've been talking about is consumer education, which is part of this event that we're doing tonight. Is to make sure that people understand why we're doing this and why it's so important, and how they can access to the various support levels that are out there in the market to do funding and support and design and technical know-how. So what Valent been doing, we basically opened our own R&D development centre in Germany. We spent £54 million about 10 years ago developing our own test labs and being able to generate the next generation of heat pumps in the market. We felt were going to be the best opportunity to take us away from the fossil fuel. This slide was really just about to promote some of the actual key measurements that as a company we see ourselves moving away from a gas boiler company to a heat company going forward, and this is one of the first steps we made into doing that to our own research and development centre. One of the key things that people always ask about heat pumps, can they work in all the different environments that we see today, and this slide was really about to kind of give you the understanding that heat pumps do work down to minus 25 outside. They have actually been tested to work down to minus 45, and they still work at that level, but the conditions obviously where heat pumps are working are obviously to work in extreme cold conditions in built up areas like cities where potentially people may be threatened by noise, and obviously to do with coastal conditions where obviously heat pumps tend to be outside and they can make sure they don't have any issues where they get corroded from the environment. So in this day and age, heat pumps are very much part of our life. They've moved, the technology side of things has moved on dramatically over the years, and ultimately we want to make sure that the people understand that we are there to support and understand that heat pumps can be installed in many different scenarios. So that was a very quick outline of and I just wanted to throw the floor open to questions really, because ultimately there's an awful lot to do with heat pumps I think we can discuss. It's all about trying to understand what kind of things that's going through you might need to understand to help you understand heat pumps a bit more. The key thing for us is to come and talk to us about projects that you're working with, and we can help and support you with that design, help you with the understanding how the technology is going to be best suited to you, and ultimately sometimes it might not be the best solution, and we'll be quite happily there to tell you that. But as I say, anybody want to throw in some questions here while we've got some time?
Can I start?
Yeah.
We talked a lot about heat pumps, but without differentiating necessarily between air source and ground source. And I'm just wondering if you could very quickly give sort of pros and cons of the two, and indeed if there are any other types of heat pumps.
Yeah, fundamentally the most common ones is air to water, which is a common one, which is traditionally what you class as an air source heat pump, and the other one is a ground source heat pump. 10 years ago, the market seemed to perceive that ground source was the best way forward for heat pumps to get the best performance out of that. And generally, ground source at that point would have been the best performing renewable technology in the market. But as the period of time's gone on, the technology's caught up in the air source market, the performance numbers in air sources have really started to challenge that ground source's pole position. So probably the outside the performance numbers, you know, most people would lend itself to ground source to self-build new developments, because ultimately you need a lot of groundworks. You know, how that works is you have the capabilities to get the energy. You have to have a fair amount of ground, or you have to go down into have boreholes to go down into the ground, and they can be quite costly. And there is unless you know what you're doing with that side of things, it can potentially go wrong when it comes down to heat loss calculations, because you have to be able to extract the right amount of energy out of the ground. And if you don't get them calculations right, you know, potentially you can freeze the ground completely, because you're pulling too much energy out of it, and that's the drawbacks, where sometimes you just don't have enough energy coming back out of the ground to keep the property. And once you've kind of obviously got it in the ground, it's a little bit harder to dig it all back up again. So it has its downfalls with that, and obviously the cost involved in it as well. But where we're finding now is that the technology side source tends to be working in more larger development projects rather than that small sort of like one-off property buildings, and that's where I see the main development. And the air sources are far more simplistic install if it's done correctly in the heat loss calculations.
So my question's maybe a little bit unfair, but the 90 people in Scotland
Yes.
that you mentioned, that is obviously an area of concern. I think what you guys are doing is a brilliant example of being really progressive with product development. How much of that do you think is there a responsibility to suppliers to push that into the tradespeople? Because if the demand's there from the customer base, but the installers are now developing, should the suppliers be being a bit more progressive to push that in? And do you see any evidence of that from other people in the market?
At the present moment, what we're finding is the traditional gas installers, as I said earlier on, is that we've got a huge infrastructure of gas installers that work with us on our gas boilers at the present moment, and they're hungry for information. They are desperate to find out more about how they can support their customers. The challenge is, like everything else, is with the heating sector, it's taking the time out of their day job to come away and actually do some fundamental training. And the challenge is, when they're so busy, how do they take a step out of their traditional lives to do that? So as a company, what we tend to do is invite them into some awareness training to get them started, get them in that kind of discussion points. And it comes back to what I was talking about between the 4 pillars. The consumers are asking the questions now, rather than the installer coming in and actually educating. It's the consumers know a lot more than the installers. And we're finding that they are now being pushed down that avenue more than actually they want to be. So they're having to now lean on us to kind of help them bridge that gap in knowledge. So it's like everything else, you've got to have willingness to learn, you know. And I'll be honest, through lockdown, you know, for COVID, it was, you know, for the disadvantages it had, a lot of people went online to learn, you know, and there was a lot of upskilling that was done in that format, which was a great way to get people more engaged in what we were doing as a company. As a business, we can't see going any other way, you know, and ultimately, if the next generation heat engineers, as part of what Greg's going to be talking about in his speeches, you know, we need to embrace the new installers coming into the market to understand that the gas market is going to be moving out. We know that from Scotland from 2024, there'll be no gas boilers or all boilers installed in new buildings from that point onwards. And that's a big step. You know, 20,000 homes are built throughout the year, and we've got to stop that generation getting worse. But as I said earlier on, is our targets are set to 2045 for Scotland, and our house stock is already going to be here. It's here now, it's going to be there then. So it's the retrofit market which is the real big challenge. So the answer to that question is, we are absolutely fundamentally grabbing that by the horn and making sure that we come in and we educate them, and there's a huge amount of help for them to do that.
The Scottish Government have just announced 300 million towards district heating systems.
Yeah, so this morning. Yeah.
You've just pointed out that we need to get, we have to stop doing gas boilers by 2024. I mean, that's just round the corner in terms of timescales.
Absolutely, yeah.
Are the house builders, particularly those who do big developments, up to speed with that? The impression the public have of that is they're nowhere near it.
Good question.
If you look at the new houses out here, I bet they've all got gas boilers in them.
Yep, and you're absolutely right to say that. And it's ultimately what you'll find is one of my day jobs is to engage with the national developers and the regional developers. And ultimately, if the land and the permission is going through planning permission before them actually having to go through for the changes, the building regulation standards have also been changed, and they've been rewriting that heading towards 2024. So if they've had agreements on that currently before that point, they can effectively go on and put a gas boiler in at that stage. So if there's been agreements done before then, there's nothing stopping them not having to put in, but as we've already alluded to, they have to meet a certain criteria with build standards when it comes down to energy performance, and that will come down to certainly insulation, PV, energy heat losses have to be met under that assumption, but going forward, they will not be allowed to put a gas boiler in after.
Sorry, just a quick supplementary. Do you see heat pumps, and I think you said more ground source heat pumps rather than air source heat pumps for that kind of district?
You'll find district heating networks for larger developments may be the go-to opportunity, where they've got larger development sites where they'll have plant rooms and communal district heating to be a more suitable solution, rather than every single property having an individual heat pump. The technology side of things, or commercial district heat systems, is there, certainly there now, but on a larger scale, I can see that's it, hence why that funding was announced this morning, to try and encourage social housing providers and developers to tap into that money to kind of say, actually, we've got a site plan for past 2024, and how do we basically take that off the grid. There's an awful lot of developers I'm speaking to on a regular basis are actually going to be setting this up with their own energy suppliers. They're actually going to be self-generating the power on their own sites. They're going to be their own providers. Create the energy on site and then basically control that within your own development, and a lot of that's going to be the future going forward.
There's a bit of a question of putting a heat pump into an existing system with
Yes.
a microbore.
Yes.
How is that getting any better?
The answer is, from a manufacturer's perspective, if I have to tick the box, the answer is we'll not promote installations when done on microbore. The reason for that is ultimately it's down to the open flow water that runs through the pipes, and they have to have a good open flow of circulation and volume of water coming through that, and microbore, obviously being smaller pipework, doesn't lend itself very well to air source heat pumps. It can be designed out and it can be done with microbore, and the reason why I'm saying it can be done because I've done it in my own house. And the reason why it can be done is I've taken the time to do a proper design to work out what the calculation of water needed to be, so I had to increase the radiator sizes in the property. I had to add what I call a buffer into the system to make sure there was more volume into the work. I took out the glycol, which is a sort of antifreeze glycol that ran through the system to make sure I had a good open flow of water running through so it wasn't slowed down. And I took all the TRVs off the system as well. I may be short for saying that, but I took all the thermostatic valves off the radiator to make sure there was no circulation concerns. So the answer is it will work, but you need a proper design done. But it's all to making sure that's done on that side.
Do you estimate the cost for doing a house?
If you're talking about a rough idea, you'd be looking somewhere between £8,000 to £10,000, and that's generally what you're talking about, taking the old system out and putting the new system in. You'll be aware there's various funding models out there that you can tap into. I'm assuming you may be aware of that. Scottish Government are offering at the present moment £7,500 a grant for you to apply to put a renewable heating system in your property. That grant has to be applied for as we sit here today by the 31st of March, and then you have 6 months to get that installed by that point. But the only way you get access to that grant is back to that MCS registered list that I was telling you about. The reason why that's such a challenge, obviously, as I said, there's only 98 installers that are assigned to that, so getting a hold of an MCS installer is quite hard, irrespective they're extremely busy. But there is obviously, our job is we're trying to push to make sure there's more installers going through that training, because ultimately it's similar to what you'd have with Gas Safe. They have to go through a big sort of process to get through their training program to become an MCS installer. And unfortunately it's a time consuming part of their business and cost. But certainly I wouldn't say no at microbore, but a bit of thought needs to be considered.
I'm really interested in the idea of air source heat pumps in flats.
Yep.
I'm from a housing association, Scottish Borders Housing Association, so
yep.
We've got big challenges there. And also why you went down the heat pump route and where you see the hydrogen option?
Hydrogen is, in all honesty, is going to be, Valent as a company will be looking at hydrogen, a hydrogen-ready boiler. What hydrogen is basically a more greener gas that effectively is less harmful to the environment. There's a green hydrogen and there's a blue hydrogen. Clearly the ambition is to go to completely green hydrogen, which is basically a full, obviously carbon neutral kind of opportunity for the grid network, but the problem is that the grid network's not capable of actually being ready to deliver full green hydrogen. The space and capabilities to store hydrogen and actually to get the energy out of it to create that hydrogen is not, we're not in that position as a market, and I generally feel from a business point of view we're about 20 years away from getting that as a reality into what we're talking about. Back to maybe your question to do with why ground source and heat networks. What we're finding is that new development plans going into the market where you've basically got the infrastructure is not in play yet and you can design the actual infrastructure to be that, that's where the hydrogen may find its place, but it won't really sit that well into the retrofit market. When you got the blue hydrogen, which is a blend between natural gas and hydrogen, we will be bringing out a kind of hydrogen ready boiler in due course. The main manufacturers are all out there trying to work out how that can be done effectively. There's loads of trials and sort of case studies going on behind the scenes at the present moment. The biggest challenge is that the performance of the hydrogen isn't as where we expect it to be, and that's the honest truth. We don't think the technology is not where it needs to be. It's ticking a lot of green credentials, but from a traditional homeowner's perspective on the performance that comes out of hydrogen, it is challenging at the present moment. Hence why obviously hydrogen hasn't really been on the agenda of everybody's radar currently, but the infrastructure to get hydrogen into traditional retrofit homes is quite a bit of a challenge. So I generally think going forward, to meet these targets by 2045, the opportunity for us going forward will be roughly about 20% of that market. And it's a very valid question, to be fair, and it will certainly help the more challenging properties like flats and high-rise flats to get to that kind of target. That's a sacrifice, you know, and that's where you can't physically put a heat pump on the outside of sometimes. So it's a good question. But look, social housing sector, the new build sector, they have been driven incredibly hard to try and look at the opportunities at the present moment. If it's designed correctly, it's been put in by a good qualified installer, and they're working with the technology well with the manufacturers. There's absolutely no reason why heat pumps wouldn't deliver a saving on your running performances. As a rule of thumb, and this is me giving you a rough idea, if you're running from oil, you should expect to see anything between 45 to 50% improvements in your running cost if you went from oil, LPG to the heat pump. On a well-designed new build property, you should expect to see around about a 13% improvement against gas. And yet again, that's making sure it's being installed correctly. But as we all know, the cost of gas is rising up. We can't avoid it in the news. And that differential is going to change as we go forward for that. And it's all down to making the best energy efficient system you possibly can. And that comes back to one of the slides I took out actually, was we have to work in heat systems at lower flow temperatures. Traditional radiators would have been, if you were to touch them, they would have been about 70 degrees flow temperature running through them. You know, you would have felt the heat coming off them. Heat pumps, you tend to look at that around about 45 to 50 degrees flow temperature. So it's a lower flow temperature running through that heat network. And that's the reason why some people did shy away from renewables, because they have to effectively have a slightly larger radiator. But what I would say, what's happening in the market now is, as we're moving away from heat pumps being perceived as less of a burden, you can push the boundaries of the technology. Is actually now being able to say we can actually design at higher flow temperatures without having a huge knockback on the running performances. So as the next generation where I find is that the heat pumps are going to be, you know, plug and play, and that's what I'm hoping we're going to get to, certainly over the next sort of 5 years anyway. But ultimately, you know, that's why the installers come to us. We've got the expert advice to show them how to do that correctly and install it correctly as well.
Does a heat pump increase your electric demand or usage? And does your savings take into account additional electric use rather?
The honest answer to that is, obviously you take out the cost of your gas, obviously, because you're not going to, but if it's designed correctly, as I said earlier, you should see an improvement on your actual performance. 9 times out of 10, when I've got somebody comes back to me and saying they've had an increase in their running costs, it's down to a number of factors. When it's come down to somebody's not sized the radiators correctly, they've maybe not worked out, the commission hasn't been done at their handover, or the controls haven't been set up correctly. So as a manufacturer, what we do is we bring the installer in to make sure that they've actually been trained how to make sure that system's left at the right sort of performance levels. Generally it's always quick to blame the technology, but it's actually, a lot of it is maybe just down to the handover side of things. Sometimes hasn't been done correctly, or they've not followed the guidelines in the commissioning installation. But it will generally be a lot less, it would be less if it's designed correctly, and that's generally the way it is. But ultimately, what you'll find is that you're also future-proofing yourself. You know, you're making sure that you're kind of protecting yourself about them rising costs in gas.
Rising costs in electric.
I generally think electric's going to come down.
Is there capacity in electric, grid supply as well for all this?
Scotland's a wee bit unique in that realms, because we're pretty much, there's quite a few occasions we're coming pretty much renewable off-grid from our own capabilities. Energy management is the key going forward, and as I say, once we are producing, we're going to electrification. You know what's happening with the car industry. It's certainly what's going to be happening in the industry. As I said, though, a third of our emission targets comes from our domestic homes, so that's certainly how we need to tackle it.
May I just ask a question? So we've leapt straight into the idea of heat pumps as a sustainable source because it cuts down on the use of fossil fuels. But do you think that this technology is here to stay? Do you think that the heat pumps you're installing now will last? Are we really installing sustainable technology, or are we installing something that's going to break down and we'll throw out in 5 years and bring something else in?
One of the ethos around Vaillant is that we build to last. That's one of the key aspects of what we are as a company. Every single product that we manufacture has a lifetime cycle stretch tested past 15 years. So it's that old IKEA synergy, you're sitting down how many times you set the stretch test the component parts. As a company, we would expect our product to last way above that. And as it's like everything else, if it's serviced and looked after, it would expect to last way past that. Like everything else in life, there is cheaper products in the market that maybe haven't gone through that rigorous testing process, but as a business, we are building that to last and to see out the lifetime. Now, the lifetime span of what you would class as a company, we have to make sure legally we have all the parts available for that product past that 15 years. So a lifetime cycle for a heat system is that sort of 15 to 20 years. So from our point of view, as technology starts to develop, hopefully for the better over the next sort of 10 to 15 years again, the next generation of products that are coming in will be even better than we are currently today. So it's about making sure you're not having to reinvest, and it's like everything else. Is a huge amount of product is recyclable as well. It's one of the key aspects we do about our product as well. We have to make sure that obviously that product can't be recycled back to be used again. So there's a good question actually, and it's one of the key things that we sort of promote as a business really. So yeah, definitely.
How ready do you think the power networks are for installation, because that is a big challenge for us?
The networks are challenged. Certainly when you're looking at new build sites as well. Grid connection. If everybody was to go and flick their kettles on at the same time in the morning, I think the grid would have a bit of a challenge to keep up that demand for the cup of teas every morning. It's a similar sort of logic to heat pumps. The beauty with heat pumps is they do something called soft starts. So the technology kind of doesn't have a huge spike. It doesn't take the energy from the grid straight away. It kind of ramps up. The best way I describe it is like an inverter, like an idle engine. It kind of ramps up when the technology is needing to move up, and it's all down to the demand pulling it from the grid. Not as a sharp spike to the grid, but more of a sort of gradual uptake to the actual grid needing that electricity. So the infrastructure is challenging, but they're getting better. Some of the developers out there are self-generating, which is what I mentioned earlier on. They're now starting to think about how they can be their own energy providers outright, and they could basically, as a block of 200, 300 homes, how can we be self-sufficient and basically generate our own energy? And that can be from multiple sources, from water, from PV, and basically become their own energy providers. So that is going on now, and I'm involved in a few projects like that as well. But certainly it's a challenge, but there's technology and things within the processes that can actually overcome that now. But certainly I don't see it being a massive issue, but I think it's, you know, if everybody all tomorrow went straight to heat pumps, we would have an issue, but it's migration into that.
Are you building those heat pumps now so that they can be repairable and that the pump itself can be replaceable without having to buy the whole kit?
Absolutely. Without me going into a long-winded story behind it, ultimately there's, you know, from a heat pump perspective, there's not so much more can go wrong. If you think about gas boilers, there's a lot of componentry parts and they do tend to go over a period of time. Heat pumps have got less issues, what we've discovered over the years, that they tend to last a lot longer, but as a company we are obligated to make sure that all the parts are available for that, way outside that 15-year cycle I was telling you about. So the answer to the question is, if there's something to the break in that pump, we would give you the part to repair it.
I'm going to introduce you next to Greg Steele, who is the Curriculum and Learning Manager in Sustainable Construction at Borders College. And he's going to tell us a little bit more about the opportunities that are available in training the next generation of construction engineers.
Yeah, thank you very much for asking me to come and talk. The net zero opportunities are huge, and it's a massive. I just can't begin to talk about the scale of the project ahead. You know, the transition to net zero is going to be absolutely massive. A third of our emissions come from the construction industry and from domestic homes producing our emissions. So we need to get that down in a very short time scale. I've been a lecturer in carpentry and joinery at the local college for many years. I'm now the curriculum manager, and I've been working with students, apprentices in joinery, brickwork, plumbing, electrical, painting and decorating, and those are the courses and the courses that I run at the college. I've got a real passion for sustainable building. I'm a multiple self-builder, so I've done many self-builds, and sustainable construction is really a big passion of mine. This slide here, the middle picture there, was back in 2010 when we started looking at this. It's not a heat pump, but it's an airtight testing rig. So way back in 2010 we started introducing this to the students. So there's many generations of students that have come through that have the training in low energy builds through their apprenticeship cycles at the college. I've just recently built a passive house myself, so passionate about fabric first. I think it's absolutely key to get the fabric of the buildings right, and you know, the technology's great, the low carbon heating technologies are great, but the fabric first approach is absolutely key for me. And the house down in the bottom corner there is a self-build project, and it's net positive. So it's A+ rated and it's carbon positive. So the technology is here today to build new builds that are net positive, and it's there's no central heating system in that house. It's just passive. So it uses a passive system, solar gain, orientation of the building, high levels of insulation, and I'm going to talk about the 4 pillars. Slightly different 4 pillars to Richard's 4 pillars, trying to explain the fabric first approach and what we're basing our upskilling and training on within the college. The first one, the key one, is fabric first. So insulation materials. It's more than possible now to build new builds and to a certain extent retrofit to give you very, very high levels of insulation in the structure of the building. And to take that sustainability a bit further is using using sustainable, natural, sustainable materials in those insulation materials, likes of wood fibre, hemp, natural products which are more breathable and more sustainable are being developed now that are really good, and they can substitute some of the more damaging and high performance insulation materials, but they're not as environmentally sound as more the natural materials that are coming on board now. The second pillar, I guess, is the build tight, and the context around the build tight is to install the insulation correctly so that there's no gaps around the insulation materials, but also to build tight and have a layer of to actually make the construction low air permeability, because an awful lot of heat and consequently energy is lost through air permeability in a building. So that's air leaking out the building, drafts, and a leaky construction. And if you can reduce that air permeability down, you can save a lot of energy. And it's particularly pertinent in low energy buildings, because when you have high levels of insulation, that ventilation heat loss is a much higher percentage of your overall heat loss. So to build a construction tight and have that, I don't like to use the word airtight, although it's airtight technology. It sounds really bad. It sounds like a Tupperware box where you close the lid and it's sweaty and horrible inside, but it's not like that at all. Just removing those construction drafts and making those ventilation heat losses reduce. And going on from that, the next pillar is to ventilate correctly. So if you have a low air permeability in your fabric of your building, then you need to introduce a ventilation system into the building. And modern buildings tend to use a heat recovery system, a ventilation heat recovery system, which will allow your building to be adequately ventilated. It will give you a really great internal comfort and high indoor air quality, which is key. You can monitor the indoor air quality, and actually it's a prerequisite now in the building regs to monitor your indoor air quality. So you can CO2, your CO2 levels are a really good indication of your indoor air quality. And using these ventilation systems with heat recovery give you excellent indoor air quality, and they're a really good system. The last pillar is a low carbon heating system, which Richard's talked about, exploring heat pumps and different ways of low carbon heating your building. But ultimately, the first three pillars, if you get those elements correct, then your heat load in the building is minimal, and you can actually get to a position where your heat load for your building is passive. So projectors, laptops, people, pets, solar gain from your windows, that's enough. That can be enough to heat your property. So that's the ultimate goal: get the fabric right so that your heat loss and your energy demand is so low that you can easily use one of the new low carbon technologies to heat your properties, and that's key. So all these technologies are what we promote at the college, and I'm just going to go on to explain some of the training facilities that we've got. The campus we have in Hawick, we built a new eco room. That's the extension that you can see here. It actually was highly commended at Architectural Awards recently. It's built on passive house principles, so it effectively is a passive extension which requires no heating. And we've been funded by Scottish Power Energy Networks and the Energy Skills Partnerships to install lots of equipment into this building to provide sustainable construction training to the wider supply chain. And I'm going to go through a range of short courses that that are available at the college, and they're all available on the link below, and I'm sure we can share this slide deck with you. There's a Green Skills landing page where you can see all the training courses that are available at the college. And also, if you're a levy payer or a small business in the borders, there is flexible workforce development funding available, which can fund these courses. So effectively, that training can be free to the supply chain. The skills, we can break them down into three parts: sustainable construction, renewable technologies, and we've got some electrical courses as well. I'm not an expert on the electrical side of it, but I'll let you know what we can do. Firstly, the sustainable construction. We run an awareness course for anyone that wants to come along, and it covers all aspects of sustainable construction right from the very start. It's kind of basic, no prior knowledge required for that one, and it's a one-day course based at the Hawick site, and it showcases all the different technologies. Once following on from that, there's specific training courses, and they tend to be one-day courses around each of the specific technologies. So after you have an overview, you can go back and do a course particularly focusing in on one of the technologies. One of them is insulation systems, and we're looking at different types of sustainable insulation systems, both internal wall insulation and external wall insulation. That also covers there's heat loss and U-value calculations, and it gets into some of the design about calculating heat loss in homes. And we can also do a course on airtight construction and testing. So all buildings need to be tested now. I think it's 1 in 20 new builds on an estate, but also individual new builds have to be tested for airtightness and air permeability. And we have the RetroTech equipment, and one of our staff members is an expert tester, so he can run through the testing. But also looking at the techniques for taping and making buildings airtight and have extremely low air permeability. There's an example there of a grommet, and where an electrical penetration comes through the airtight layer in the building, but it goes into detail about the sort of techniques to how to airtight your building. The second one we have is, the next one is mechanical ventilation heat recovery systems, and we've got a passive system from a manufacturer called Paul, Heat Recovery Systems, and our training session goes over the principles of ventilation, understanding air quality, looking at all the system components, the different ducting types, the actual machine itself, how to maintain and look after these systems. They're really quite simple. They work, they kind of get programmed, they run in the background, they're quiet, they're seamless, they just kind of run in the background. You have to change the filters in them every 3 months or every 6 months. These systems allow these passive houses and low energy houses to breathe and have constant fresh air, and they're a really great little system. So more training is available on that. Another one is thermal imaging. This goes along in conjunction with the low energy building. Thermal imaging is a great way. It's just a visual. You use thermal imaging cameras to see the surface temperatures, and they're great for looking for heat loss and looking for installation installments to make sure it's okay. There's a couple of examples here. The one on the far left is just looking at drafts around it. It was a poorly sealing door, and there was in a cold area, and immediately with the thermal imaging camera you can identify the defects in the building. The next one is just to look at a heating system. So if you're analysing heating systems, you can take spot temperatures on flow and return pipes, etc., etc., and it's a really good way to analyse systems. The next image is an electrical system, so it's looking for faults in electrical systems. So for mechanical and electrical investigation, thermal imaging is very good for that. And the last one just illustrates there's a property. The lower panel is just the normal picture, and the upper panel is showing the missing insulation above the kitchen. And this was a new build, so there's just this panel here. And this area just shows you the cold spots where there was missing insulation, and you wouldn't actually, apart from, you just put the camera on, scan the room, and you can immediately find the defects. So it's a great technology. Going on to the renewable technologies, we've installed a lot of the renewable technology. We've used Valent kit, and we've been working closely with Richard and our staff to upskill our staff, and they've done a lot of training up at the Valent Centre and a lot of online training during the lockdown, and now our staff are trained and we're up and running to deliver these heat pump courses. We also do awareness courses for an overview, but we can do BPEC accredited heat pump training for installers. So for any tradesmen that are thinking of taking this leap into the heat pump technology, then Borders College is the place to come along and get your training course. We also got a BPEC accredited solar thermal course, which is an equivalent system that uses solar energy to generate hot water. So again, a renewable technology. And our students, our plumbing apprentices, part of their framework now is that they do renewable technology as part of their training. So all the apprentices that are coming through now will be trained on renewable technology, heat pumps and solar thermal as part of their emerging technologies unit, which is built into the plumbing framework. So these new breed of apprentices that are coming out into the trade, they'll all be au fait with the lower carbon technology. So they'll be the next generation of installers, and we need an army of them. So it's a good start to get all our apprentices trained. On the electrical side, we have training courses around 18th edition, Smart Home Technology, which is your app-controlled radiator valves, lights, security. We've got a jig set up that has all the technology in the jig, and we can showcase all that and run a course around smart home technology. What's become really pertinent recently is a course, EV charging point installation for electricians. That's been really popular. So with the more and more people getting electric vehicles, this is going to be taking off. And lastly, the solar PV installation. We've got solar PV installation at the Eco Room, and we're tying that into a battery storage system. So we've got another short training course to look at battery storage and how that can be integrated into a low carbon solution for housing. Yeah, I just want to mention finally the flexible workforce development. So if you're looking for help with funding for these training courses, then you can apply for flexible workforce development funding. If you sign up, I think that this current round, the training must be committed by the summer this year, but there's £15,000 worth of training costs for levy payers and up to £5,000 worth of training for SMEs. So if you're a small SME in the Borders, you can contact the team down at Hike, and they will basically sign you up, make a bespoke package of training courses for you, and it will be funded through the Flexible Workforce Development Fund. So it's a really good opportunity to come along and take advantage of these training courses that are available. I think that's me. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to take questions.
Can I ask about, you talk a lot on PV and SOC pumps and renewables, about installation.
Yeah.
How much of the courses are about the maintenance? Because from the first presentation we're going to have lots of new products that need maintaining.
Yeah.
So how much are you geared up to the maintenance side?
I guess the maintenance on the specific aspects of the course, I'm not an expert in all of the different technologies, but from the awareness course point of view, it's very much an awareness of the technology in the first instance, but once you get into the individual courses, the renewable technology courses, then I'll just take the heat pump course for instance. The actual course encompasses the design, it encompasses the installation, the commissioning, and the maintenance and repair. So it kind of does cover all of them. And I'm sure, I'm thinking of the battery storage. The electricians, when they're doing their presentation around the battery storage and the PV, it will include the maintenance. Certainly the mechanical ventilation heat recovery does, because I know Stephen, one of the lecturers that has just gone on he's just done a BPEC course up in Dunfermline, and a lot of the content of that was maintenance as well, so that'll be covered in the course. Yeah.
Maybe just to give you some insight on the course, there is a maintenance training program we give to install in this as well, so we bring them through to understand as much as the installation as the maintenance is hugely important. It's like everything else, so that we give them the right understanding how we should be doing correctly, but the beauty of the renewable technology is it's I wouldn't say it's easier, but it's a lot less complex. So yeah, we take that through.
I guess fundamentally from my point of view, the more we can invest in the fabric first in the building, the smaller the systems are that are required to meet the heat demand. So by investing in that fabric first, you're minimising the technology that you have to bolt on to actually make it work, and maybe Richard won't be happy about this, but the less you have to bolt on, the less systems you have to, the less plant you have to put in to make the building work, the less maintenance you'll have. So I would always go get as much of the fabric first done as you can, and then your heating systems are reduced in size and reduced in cost.
We're finding that the fabrication of heat is extremely, you can get that down really low, but it's the hot water demand is one of the biggest challenges around that. You know, as much as you can try and make the fabrication really controlled and keep the energy in there, but it's still...
Yeah, we still need hot water. Yeah. And the solar thermal, so the solar thermal training course, it's kind of a backup. It's good in, you know, when you have a lot of solar energy, you get a lot of hot water, so you maybe need a backup system to meet your hot water demands in the colder months of the year.
Existing solar panels were retrofitted with battery storage.
Yes, I don't see why not. I don't think that's a problem. I don't have the definitive answer because my electrical side's not my area of expertise, but I don't see why an existing array you can't then add battery storage to it. I think that's absolutely doable.
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say, in relation to the Flexible Workforce Development Fund, I made an application and I was really surprised at how easy it was, because sometimes I think that as small business owners we're aware of these funds, but it feels sometimes like you have to jump through a lot of hoops to get the support, and that can be off-putting, especially if everyone's doing day jobs. But it was super easy to get past, and I would just encourage anyone to have a look at it. The team are really great at helping you through that process.
I would say that we have a team at the DEBI department. It's the Department of Enterprise, Business and Innovation. Get that right. They will take your application and they will discuss your needs, and they'll effectively build a training program around what it is you're after, and put that funding in place. And actually, because all these courses are quite new, if there's specialist training or training that's not offered on the Green Skills site, if it's something that we can adapt or train up a member of staff to actually deliver a different training course, then that can be incorporated as well. So if there's something that's not on there that you particularly want training on, then ask the question and we'll see what we can do.
We have a building here on the racecourse which is 199 years old, and it was installed with very simple technology, big holes in the front for ventilation and big fireplaces to keep us warm. And essentially that technology hasn't really died out. It still works extremely well. We've never had to replace it. Is there a danger? We're talking about the materials of which we're building, to install ventilation systems which then have filters that need to be replaced every 3 months. Are we actually developing buildings with way too much in them that perhaps is it the same question really as I asked the first speaker? Is it really sustainable, or are we just filling our buildings with stuff that we don't need?
I think if you're using sustainable materials and you have a really good high performance fabric of the building, then you're not burning coal fires, and you're not pushing out CO2 into the atmosphere. You can build and retrofit to a certain extent, but certainly with new builds you can make the fabric so good that you effectively eliminate your need for a heating system. So and I take the point about the ventilation systems, but you can still open the windows. In summer, it's not like it runs all the time. Well, it does run all the time, but in the summer you can open the windows, and it's just technology that runs in the background. So I wouldn't get too hung up on the ventilation systems, but they do provide really great indoor air quality throughout the year. There was a recent study done in Glasgow, and they put the CO2 monitors in average bedrooms of Scottish homes, and the CO2 levels peaked at over 2,000 parts per million, which is in a really poor air quality. And with homes with ventilation, you maintain your CO2 levels below 1,000, which is considered good air quality. And just the comfort levels in buildings where you have air movement, so you're to some extent with convection radiators and open fires, you've always got constant air movement. So your comfort levels are much lower. So in a passive house or a modern low carbon house, there's very little drafts and low air movement. So actually you need less heating because you've got more comfort, if that kind of makes sense, because you've not got that air movement which makes you feel colder. So I would say to anyone, if you've not experienced a low energy passive home, just the human comfort levels in those buildings are exceptional, and it's definitely not like a Tupperware box, which the name maybe suggests, but yeah.
Greg, can I ask a question about? I think there's two separate issues, and we need to keep them separate. New build is one thing,
Yeah.
and in my view, we shouldn't be building houses anymore that require heating systems, because we know how to build houses that don't need them, and really we should be pushing that very hard.
Yeah.
The bigger problem is retrofitting the existing housing stock, which we can't replace. We're stuck with it. The houses we've got are the ones we're going to be living in 20 or 30 years' time. It seems to me that if we're going to retrofit those houses well, we need more than just people who can come along and stick an air source heat pump in or stick solar panels on the roof or whatever. It's quite complicated. And Fabric First is absolutely right. We need to do the right thing for the building, but every building's a bit different. How do we get enough people trained up to be able to go into a house and work out what the best thing for that particular house is? Is that something that you're producing people to do, or is that expertise going to come from somewhere else?
I absolutely agree that that is the biggest challenge. I mean, 80% of the existing housing stock is below standard, and that is the challenge, to bring that up to speed. And those houses are still going to be here in 2050, and they're still going to be used. So we have to target that retrofit. And you're right, there's no one archetype that makes it easy. There is a big push for the past 2030, past 2035, new regulations coming in, which there'll be certain roles. So there'll be retrofit assessors, retrofit coordinators, and these roles will be sort of baked into the sort of structure of buildings. So we are looking at the moment at training courses to upskill our staff to be able to deliver training courses for retrofit coordinators and retrofit assessors. So that is coming down the line, and we're looking at that. It's always a challenge for us, because we're, you know, as a curriculum, we're training our brickies and painters and joiners and electricians to do their craft, and at the same time, you know, we're trying to push renewable technologies, sustainable technologies, and, you know, potentially a big push into retrofit market. So as much as we can put into the framework of our apprentices, we try and embed that in the apprenticeship frameworks, but there's definitely going to be a market for further wider training for the likes of a retrofit coordinator. And there are companies out there at the moment, Elmhurst is one, and the Retrofit Academy that run these courses, but it's certainly an area we're looking at in the Borders College, because we want to have that local, you know, a local source of training as well. So yeah, retrofit's going to be big. It's just a huge challenge, and yeah, a big mountain to climb.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much.
So thanks very much. Thank you to Greg and to Richard for those two talks. Please stay around and do have a chat. And also Emily at the front here, I hope will hand out in just a moment some questionnaires. So these net zero events were scheduled as part of a programme to try and sort of find out how we might help to sort of spread the word about net zero, and how we can effectively change minds in the community. And so we are conducting some research, not just with those of you who are here and have listened dutifully to the speakers, but also with those who were invited to attend and haven't been able to come. So we're just sort of trying to sort of monitor people's attitudes towards this and work out how we take the messaging forward. And we certainly hope that over the next few weeks, months and years, Visit Kelso and the Southern Upland Partnership will be part of a programme where we bring these things to you, and we help to implement the changes that are required over the next few years. So if you do have just a couple of minutes to fill out the questionnaires, and please do give us any feedback after this event, because it will all be very valuable. But in the meantime, thank you very much indeed for attending. Thank you, Pip. And to Emily for your hard work in putting this together, and to our speakers, and please do stay and chat.